Wednesday, November the 9th. Lake levels about the same as it was last week. It's a little over 911. Water temperature is coming down a little bit. I haven't got much of a fishing report for you. Since my last fishing report, I was at Grand Lake for 4 days, and I got to go out for a few hours this afternoon. But the water temperature, I was up in the upper James River today, and it was about 63 degrees up there. And I think the main lake's probably about 65, 66 degrees. So, where I don't have a first-hand fishing report for you, what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is I've always got a lot of people asking me what kind of line I use, what size for different baits. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. Now, I'm not sponsored by any particular line company, and I use a variety of different lines. I'll kind of start out with my spinning rods. Probably 90% of the time, I use strictly monofilament on my spinning rods. And the brand I use is Andy's line. It's a company that makes a lot of saltwater line, but I've had real good luck with it over the years. It's clear line. The reason I like it, I think it's good and strong, and like I say, it's clear, so it helps me see the line, and I don't get as much memory as I do with a lot of other lines. Now, the reason I don't use fluorocarbon on a spinning reel, I think the fluorocarbon's got a lot more memory than monofilament, so it tends to coil a lot more than the mono does. Now, this particular rod, I do have braid on it. If I'm fishing in a little bit heavier cover where I want stronger line, rather than try to put 10 or 12 pound line on a spinning rod, what I'll do is I'll put 10 or 20 pound braid. And the braid I use for my spinning rods, Lew's makes a braid, and I use their braid on my spinning rods. And then I've got either an 8 or 10 pound leader on it. Now, I said 95% of the time I use strictly mono. Some situations in a tournament I will use fluorocarbon for drop shot and fish and finesse baits, but the problem with the fluorocarbon on a spinning rod, like I said, it gets a lot of memory. You can use Real Magic to help keep the memory out, but after a couple days of fishing, it gets a lot of twist. You got to drag it out behind the boat, where the regular mono I can fish for a week or so without having to straighten it out. Now, the size I use, normally on all my drop shot rigs, I'll use 6 pound. Once in a great while, I'll use 8. If I'm fishing a shaky head, a lot of times I'll use the 10 pound braid with an 8 pound leader. And I use a surgeon's knot to tie the monofilament to the braid. I usually use about an 8 or 10 foot leader on it. Now, my bait casters, all my jig fishing, I usually always use fluorocarbon. My top waters, buzz baits, and spinner baits, I'll use mono, and there again I'll use the Andes. A lot of times on my top water I'll use 10 to 15 pound. Spinner bait, buzz bait, I'll usually use 15 to 17 pound on it. And the reason you want to use mono, like on your top waters and your buzz baits, is monofilament floats where fluorocarbon sinks. So working a top water bait, if your line is sinking, it's going to impair the action of the bait. So that's the main reason we use mono. And I like the mono on a spinner bait. Actually, mono's got more stretch than fluorocarbon. So I think a lot of times that stretch can help me with the spinner bait. Most of the time you're fishing a spinner bait relatively shallow, so I don't feel like you need the fluorocarbon as far as to help you detect the bites on the spinnerbait. Now, on my jig rods, crankbaits, I usually use fluorocarbon, and probably my favorite fluorocarbon to use is the Sun FC Sniper, and I will also use a Lew's fluorocarbon. Now, the difference, this is Sunline FC flipping line, and the difference in this line here, about every 2 foot, it goes to, it's clear line, but about every 2-3 foot, there's a foot or so section of chartreuse. And when you get old like me, it helps me see the line. Anytime I'm jig fishing, you always want to jig a worm. You always be paying attention to your line. So the chartreuse on it helps me see the line. And what you do is you cut it off right at the chartreuse and tie right there so that you don't have chartreuse right above your bait, especially in the clear water. Now, depending on how deep I'm fishing, and what kind of jig I'm fishing, normally I used to use a lot of 12-pound line around the docks flipping, but I found I've got myself into trouble flipping in behind and around dock stalls with 12-pound. So I primarily, if I'm fishing, 15 foot or less, I primarily use the 16-pound. Now on a football jig, the same way. I used to use 10 and 12. I think I got a few more bites, but I found with a little bit lighter line, I had more stretch. So when I was fishing, maybe a football jig 30, 35 feet deep, I didn't get as good a hook sets. I find that with the bigger line, I get a little bit better hookup. I don't have as much line stretch. And also, I don't have to worry about the line breaking. When we're fishing them jigs on the bottom, like a football jig, you're fraying that line up quite a bit. So, I might be giving up the feel of a few more bites, but I think my hookup ratio and landing ratio is a lot better with the little bit stronger line. Crankbaits, like a Spro rock crawler or wiggle wart, crankbait that runs 8 to 10 feet deep. Normally I'll throw on table rock, I'll throw a 10-pound line. Sometimes when it gets real tough, if I want the bait to get down a little deeper, I will go to 8-pound fluorocarbon. And I won't use like the sniper fishing, flipping line. I'll just use a regular 8 to 10-pound FC sniper or a loose 10-pound fluorocarbon. Jerkbait, I usually use 10-pound. Deep diving crankbait like a 6XD. I usually use 10-pound unless I'm fishing in a lot of cover. I will go to 12-pound line. Now, if I go to like Kentucky Lake, sometimes I'll even step up to 15-pound line where we're catching a lot bigger fish. But on the crankbait, that lighter, thinner diameter line will help your bait get down a little bit deeper. And sometimes I will use fluorocarbon, not fluoro, mono on a crankbait and jerkbait as well in the dead of the winter. I like the mono on the jerkbait. A lot of times the bait's not getting down that deep, so I don't feel like I'm giving anything up on detecting the strike, but it's got a little bit more stretch than the fluorocarbon does. And when you're running, like 10-pound line, and when we're throwing a jerkbait in the springtime, there's always the possibility of catching a 6-7-pound fish. I like the little bit, the mono, because it's got a little bit more stretch, a little bit more forgiving than the fluorocarbon. So hopefully, I will get out fishing some more this week, and I'll have an updated fishing report of what the fish are doing. But for the most part, from the people I've talked to, and if you look at the FLW weights last weekend, the fishing was extremely tough. The good thing is the weather's cooling down. It's getting down into 40 degrees at night, 60 in the day. So that's going to bring the water temperature down. When I was out today, there was a lot of shad active in the creeks. Not a whole lot of fish back there with them yet, but as that water temperature cools down, the fish should start following them shad, back into the creeks and in the pockets. And the crank, look for the wiggle wart bite to pick up. We should start to get a good topwater bite as well. So until next week, good luck, good fishing.